God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans. We are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition of News, Nuggets, and Insights. And today is Friday, August 17, 2018, and we are less than 1 month away from the fall holy days. And we've got a lot to bring you today, and we're going to be bringing you a different story. We're actually going to take a story today. We're going to take the news of today that's going to bring us back in history, 447 years, which will point to the prophecy for tomorrow. And it's all tied in today into the program of our news and the biblical nuggets for our program today. So you get an exciting program coming. We're going to talk about insights. We're going to give you some brief insights, what's going on around the world first before we get into all of that. Then we're going to talk about the cultural changes that are underway into Europe. And then we're going to tie all that into a battle that you've probably never heard about before. It's called the Battle of Lepanto. It's the battle that many said saved the West. You ready? Let's get started. We want to start with something on our News Nuggets Insights News Briefs with our new little video graphic here to bring you the story as we keep working in our News Nuggets and Insights changes. So let's talk about something first, and I'm trying to do this with a straight face. This is again from last week. Juvenile delinquency and the unlawful dreaded straws. So we got another video graphic from California. And you can't help but just bringing out all this news in California. Remember 2 weeks ago, they talked about the straw and making it unlawful? News brief, 3-year-old drank with a straw, chased by police on the highway. There you have it. Well, anyway, I couldn't pass that up. If you got a story on straws, send it to us. We'll try to bring it out here. The dreaded, horrible straw. All right, now let's get into something a little bit more serious now. About 3 years ago, we brought this picture out, and we were talking about the unveiling of the satanic statue in Detroit. All right, so I'm going to bring this out today because I was sent this from Clayton Evans, one of the ministers in our church, since we were talking about pedophilia, and I believe we didn't mention something like this when this picture came out. So let's bring something out here to share you how do you talk about Satan when he comes in with all this deception? And it's obvious what you're looking at that's obvious what we're looking at. But there's more inside that picture we didn't bring out, so I'm going to do that today. A little before midnight on Saturday, this was back in 2015, a crowd around 700 gathered in an old industrial warehouse a few blocks from the Detroit River for what they'd been told was the largest public satanic ceremony in history. Most of them professed to be adherents to Satanism, that loosely organized squad of the occult that defines itself as a religious group. All right, so now, when we looked at that picture, I mean, that's obvious to everyone. You see the pentagram, you see the picture, you see the image itself. But look right here. We have the children worshiping that picture, that image. And so the reason it was sent to me again, and I wanted to take a moment to go back in time to bring you this out again just now, is that the satanic, the evil, the occult that's going after the children has been in front of us. And I don't remember bringing that out a few years ago. I said, wow. So from time to time, you need to go back and rethink what's going through here to try to see if we can gather more pictures, because Satan comes as an angel of light quite often and deceives many. And here we were being deceived right in front of our very eyes as to what's going on here. Taking our children and bringing them to a satanic cult image. And we're seeing that and looking at today with pedophilia. So anyway, I wanted to bring that out. A couple more short stories before we actually get into our focus. This is from the Fiscal Beacon. The Russian Prime Minister warns of economic sanctions, economic war over the U.S. sanctions. This came out just a few days ago. Moscow issued a stern warning to the U.S. on Friday against ramping up sanctions against Russia, saying that the Kremlin will retaliate with economic, political, and unspecified other measures. And they did not say what the other measures were, and there's no telling what they will be doing. Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev's warning reflects that Russian fears over the impact of the new restrictions on the economic and assets, including the ruble, which has lost nearly 6% of its value this week on sanction jitters, according to Reuters. The sanctions that's been raised against other countries and the tariffs is bringing about economic problems for many countries and bringing several of them, including Iran and Turkey, to its knees. And Turkey, we're going to talk about in just a second, had already been on the way out of its currency for this whole year. So Turkey, August 13th. Summary, Turkish currency crisis sends shockwaves through the markets. This is the Turkey financial crisis. It says the lira hit low as Erdogan says that the attacks will continue as it happened. In other words, they're going to continue to do what they're doing regardless of the economic impact. In the headlines, all of the day's economic and financial news as Turkey's lira, the crisis hits in shares and currencies around the globe. Turkish crisis ripples through the global markets. President Erdogan hits out at U.S., said Erdogan lira will stabilize soon after it hits record low. Turkey struggles to cope with the lira side. Now, these are all headline stories. What I'm reading you right here, these are headline stories that went around the globe because of what happened to Turkey. What they were trying to do then is stabilize the rest of the world's economies so that they don't get pulled into this abyss with another country because of Turkey's size. So all of these things are going on, showing how the impact of everything is just intertwined. And the markets and the problems that they're having today, these are just little kindles of fire that's going to eventually ignite from around the globe. Because as well as people think things are going, it's not. I mean, the tension around the world is absolutely horrendous. China's figuring a way to get away from the U.S. dollar. Russia's trying to figure out how they're going to tie in with China to get away from the oil and what they're doing. So we're trying to bring all of these things out. In the middle of, we talk about the economy, and the economy in the United States, supposedly how great that it's doing. And man, I hate to be the guy who burst the bubble, but as well as the United States is doing, we are on a precipice of an incredible impending disaster of financial collapse. So when you look at the United States, and we're going to be talking about this, I just haven't done it yet because we're going to need several programs to do it. We had a little bit of time, so I was waiting until after the Feast of Tabernacles so we can actually focus and concentrate on what's going on. But here's what I want to warn everyone today, is that we are in more dangerous times now than we were in 2008 because, see, nobody's got the alarm up. Everybody's being told how great things are, how financially how well we're doing. The economy's improving, and it is to some degree. But when you look at the engines, the motor that affects everybody's economy, you're watching month after month, quarter after quarter, records of debt continuing to grow. So now, if it does that now with the economy improving and companies moving back in, and all of that is true, but we're still deteriorating financially as a nation. Individually, last quarter, the personal debt again set new records. And our unfunded liabilities, you ready for this? The unfunded liabilities for this nation in the 18 months that President Trump took office, and there's no way he could do that in 18 months. That means the administrations that preceded him have taken the debt and passed it on to the next generation and the next administration. The unfunded liabilities in the United States in 18 months has risen by nearly $10 trillion. That's not a B, that's a T in 18 months. And we haven't hit the $10 trillion they're talking about over the next decade of actual liabilities of working day after day after day. So I'm telling everyone, don't let your guard down. If you have an opportunity to be able to gain some economic income now, get it while you can, because time's going to come when that golden goose is going to stop, and when this world becomes to crash, it's going to make 2008 look like child's play. So yeah, I wanted to mention that to you. Now, we're going to get into all of that, but probably after the feast, because we don't have a lot of time, and I need time to develop that story to go through all the intricate parts of around the world and the United States and how it affects your lives and our children's lives. It's very, very important. So don't let your guard down. We will come back to that. All right, now let's go on. Another Turkish headline. Turkish financial crisis is deepening. And the truth is the crises they're deepening all around the world. All right, this is just, This is just another, like Greece was just about 18 months ago to 2 years ago, and being propped up again, and everything's being propped up while the debt continues to climb. All righty. Now let's take a little story here in Israel, all right? This is living under the constant threat of bombings in Israel. I saw this little story, and I thought it was absolutely amazing how we wake up every day and we get in our cars or we go to work, we send our children off to school, and no problem. Last week over in Israel, this is from August 8th, that the 2018, that the Israel Defense Forces hit 12 Hamas positions on the Gaza Strip. Why? Because they were retaliating, right? Including a factory that produces the concrete for terror tunnels late Wednesday night after several dozen rockets were fired in southern Israel by the Hamas terror group. According to the IDF, approximately 70 rockets were launched into the Gaza Strip at Israel, but the Iron Dome, the aerial defense system, intercepted 11 of the majority of the rockets, the rest of them hitting open places. So now, when I saw this little video clip, and I'm thinking about our children and our families here in the United States, where we get up and we just go about our daily lives. In Israel, it's not that way. And we sometimes need to be reminded of the evil that's actually out there. I've got a little 40-second clip. It's going to show you how the people there were looking at the rocket come in because the sirens went off. A rocket comes in, and while they're watching one rocket and burst in the sky, another rocket blows up behind them. And this is around a school where people were picking up their children from school to bring them home. A little 40-second clip taken off of a cell phone. Let's take a look at that now.
Вот здесь упало, там нормально. Нет, нет. Суки, не дети.
How would you like to live in that environment? Anyway, that's what they live in all the time. And that went on for 2 or 3 days. So while they're watching that rocket, right behind them, a bomb goes off and injures quite a few of the people right around them, right from behind them. So the border fight intensifies at the night rockets into airstrikes, which was another headline the next day. So the UN Middle East envoy Nikolay Maldonado said that in an overnight statement, says, "I am deeply alarmed by the recent escalation of violence between Gaza and Israel, particularly today's multiple rockets fired toward the communities in southern Israel." So the UN said that he was engaged with Egypt in an unprecedented effort to avoid serious conflict, but warned that the situation could rapidly deteriorate with devastating consequences for all people. Now, these are actual shots, photos from that night of the defense is going out, the lights going off, the rockets blowing up, and then they're counteracting into the Gaza with Israel. Hamas says that Gaza's ceasefire reached with Israel. And this is a pattern that they do all the time. They will move themselves into a position where they have all the rockets. They will create an absolute horrid terror strike and then come back with a ceasefire, give them peace to regroup and do it again. Now, no one's talking about these things, but it needs to be brought up in around the world, and the UN needs to bring it out of what's really taking place in Israel. This is, I guess, August 10th. So we went from the 8th, yes, the last news story was the 9th, this is the 10th. The Hamas ruler said that on Thursday that truce had been reached with Israel, ending a 2-day burst of violence that had pushed the region close to war. So let me go back to that just 1 second. So now, that is a continual pattern, and you do this over the course of the year. Before you know it, you have hundreds and thousands of rockets that are actually being launched into Israel every single year, and the news doesn't cover it. It's like it's an everyday occurrence, no big deal. You get up, you go to school, you go to work. Over there, they get up, they go out, they dodge rockets, they go to school, they go to work. It's an amazing story that they have to go through over in Israel. I wanted to bring that little story out. All right, let's talk about the focus of the week. Now, this is going to be an amazing story that I'm going to bring you through today. I want to talk about the story, as I mentioned earlier in the program, We're talking about news today that's going to bring us back to history, that focuses to the future, and it's all right in front of our very eyes. You ever hear the story, living in Bible times? Well, today's story is going to show you how you and I are living in Bible times. All right, the culture change is underway in Europe. All right, public prayers, one of the parts of this program, Muslim cultural infiltration, and then the prayers masking the bigger picture. So now we're going to talk about these three things, which takes us back into history. All right, you ready? Let's do this. Europe, prayer in public places, masking a much bigger picture. All right, let's take a look at that now. The prayer controversy that's going on over in Europe right now. Take a look at this picture. This is the Muslims who gathered in a public square. Of course, they had a permit and everything was perfectly legal. This is Birmingham, England, where 140,000 people gathered for an annual Eid event for a peaceful public prayer gathering. So now what is Eid? It is, I thought that was like initials that stood for something, but that's what it's called, Eid. And then there's some other names that'll go with it, depending on what branch of the Muslims that you're talking about. The Eid is like the break fast after the day of the month of Ramadan is finished. It's the very next day, which pictures the time of plenty and eating and partying and celebrating and praising their God. All right, so 140,000 gathered for this peaceful public prayer. So what's the problem with that? So if we went and said, look at this, what's going on here. I said, you see this? And they'll say, what's the problem with that? They're just getting together for prayer. Let me show you what the problem is, because it's very subtle. The public prayer controversy. The annual Birmingham EID event began in 2012 with just 12,000 people. 2 years later, the number of the faithful rose to 40,000. By 2015, it was at 70,000. No, the numbers isn't the problem. The numbers in general, what's going on, is the problem. Let me show you. The numbers in 2016, the number was at 90,000 people. At 2017, the number went to 100,000 people. And this year, 2018, the number was 140,000 people. The largest event held in Europe for the Muslims for the day of Eid. Next year, what about next year? What is next year going to bring? There's no telling. And this is just one city in one country, and it's going on all over the Middle East. All right, let's look at it a little bit further now. Why is that a problem? Let's take a look now. Birmingham, England is the second largest city after London. All right, so now the public prayer. Let's talk about what is the real problem here. Birmingham, England is the second largest city after London. It has nearly 1 million inhabitants, half of whom are immigrants, with a quarter of them Muslims. So you got one city, half are immigrants, and 1/4 of them are Muslims. So about 250,000 or so are Muslim people in this one city alone. In the very popular small Heath neighborhood, located east of the city, nearly 95% of the population is Muslim. That's going to begin to show you the problem. All right, so now, keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that in just a second. Now, while all that's going on and everybody's okay with these public prayer meetings, let me bring you back to a controversy of a prayer meeting for Christians just a few months earlier into 2017. A few months ago, the global media tempest erupted after Polish Catholics held a mass public prayer event across the country. So now you have the Muslims holding their event, and in just one section alone, 140,000 people, while the Catholics in Poland are holding their event around just their country and their borders. And it says that the news erupted. It was a tempest that erupted around the world, saying, how dare they do this? Public prayer. What's the problem? The BBC deemed it controversial due to its concerns that it could be seen as endorsing the state's refusal to let Muslim migrants in. So now here we have the Catholics protesting for their protection by prayer. You have the Muslims in their prayer in the other countries. So Why is one okay and why is one not? Because you don't want to offend the Muslim people. And that's the bottom line here. But there's a more, how do I say this, like a subliminal thing that's going on here. Inside of all of this event that's taking place and the Catholics, there seems to be a spiritual warfare that's erupting in the European nations in the Middle East. This is very similar to something that happened in the past. It's going to happen again in the future. So if you had a chance to look into the spiritual realm, what would God be showing us? So what we're looking at right now, I believe that God's going to give us the insight to be able to see through events between what I'm going to talk about now with Poland and with the Muslims. That's going to take us back into history. I need a little bit more time to build the foundation, and then we're going to go in the nuggets and bring out the spiritual. But what we're looking at now is we're beginning to see events lining up that points to the future. And by doing that, God has given us a historical record of what took place in the past. All right, so let's go on now. So here we have, this is again from the BBC. The church leaders say that the event is purely religious, but there are concerns that it could be seen as endorsing the state's refusal to let Muslim migrants in. The feast day marks the anniversary of a Christian victory of the Battle of Lepanto, which was October 7th, 1571. So as I was reading this, I'm looking, I said, what in the world is the Battle of Lepanto? Of course, their prayer day and the protests around Poland was on October 7th, which was representative of this battle. So the question came up, what in the world is the Battle of Lepanto? So as I began looking at this for the past week, the information that's in this is absolutely unnerving that we've never discussed before, and I don't know that any of the Church of God's community has ever brought this out. So this, I believe, is going to be some fresh understanding of insight that's been there for centuries that we just never paid attention to. Let's take a look now. So now let's compare the prayer. So you got record-breaking crowds at Europe's largest EID celebration, and then you have Poland Catholics who are praying along the border in a controversial event seen as anti-Muslim. So what are we looking at? This is okay. This is evil. Amazing. So if we were looking at things where God says we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, we are wrestling against the principalities of the time. Are we looking at events that happened before that we're beginning to see align again, just like it did years ago, going to take place at the end time? All right, let's go on. I'm going to answer that a little later. In Birmingham, one of England's most Islamicized cities, the annual mass public prayer has taken place under the leadership of the Green Lane Mosque, headquarters of the radical Markili Jama-Ahi Hadith organization. Not only does the Green Lane Mosque forbid women to wear trousers or use Facebook, its speakers preach against hatred of non-Muslims. So now, the Christians, we can't have the Christians praying because it'll be seen as anti-Muslim. However, the organizing community who holds these events are doing the exact same thing against the Christians, against non-Muslims. All right, so you see the controversy going on here. Abu Osama, one of the primary imams at the mosque, was recorded as saying, Osama bin Laden's, he's better than 1,000 Tony Blair's because he is a Muslim. So now you see the controversy is at the very roots, it's a religious thing that's going on here. So now we talked about this information about a year ago, actually. We brought this out on June 9th, 2017. We brought up about Geert Wilders, who was protesting against the Netherlands, especially the Dutch, who are trying to take away the Pentecost because they still observe Pentecost. And the church over there was trying to take it away and add Eid al-Fitr, which is that same day we see all these prayers going on, and replace Pentecost with that day, which was a Muslim day. So we brought that back way back in June of last year. So we're going to pick up and carry on from there, from what we're looking at. It says the Dutch have officially been enjoying the Feast of Pentecost since 1815. but the church wants to replace by the official holiday of Eid al-Fitr, which is the day of Eids, what we just showed with all the day of prayer. So in other words, no longer is it going to be a national day of holiday or a Christian church, it's going to be a Muslim day. The day marking the end of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. So anyway, so that's what we were looking at. Let's go back to where we started in this section with public prayer, talking about masking a bitter problem. All right? So now let's get into what it is actually masking. So it's actually masking Muslim domination with the introduction of Sharia law. So let's show you how that works now. Sharia law in the UK is now in penetration phase. The UK has now over 3,000 mosques, and converting empty church buildings into mosques has become one of the UK's cottage industries. The UK formally recognized Sharia court law in 2008, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Church of England, conceded that adopting the elements of Sharia law into the UK court system was unavoidable. So they admitted, because you have all these people coming in, they're controlling the environment. In one city, part of the city, 95% were Muslim now. So that means they're going to have people in the courts, they're going to have them on the voting rolls, they're going to have them in the city councils, they're actually going to control. So the Archbishop of Canterbury said it's unavoidable that they're going to be Sharia law. Because why? Because they're going to be the ones making the law. Going on. It actually reached this. Now, this is an actual picture in parts of the city where we've been looking at, where all the Muslim people are. It says you are entering a Sharia-controlled zone. Islamic rules are in force. These laws supersede the governmental laws of England that have been in existence for decades, for centuries. 2011, UK Muslims began demanding that Sharia law replace British common law and become the only law in towns with large Muslim populations, including Birmingham, where you had 140,000 people. It says today the UK has over 130 Sharia law courts. Sharia courts have been issuing rulings that contradict the UK's common law since 2008 now. 10 years. 10 years now, they've got 130 Sharia law courts. In entire parts of cities now are controlled by Sharia law inside of England itself. You're beginning to see those little increments of infiltration into the United States. Thankfully, there's a constitution at this point that's protecting most of the people here. But in small communities around the country, you're even beginning to see it here in the U.S. Now, this is a problem all over Europe, but it's really showing up right now, right here in England. All right, so now let's look at the phases of Islam. Now, I'm not going to go into the deep point here. I'm going to be saving those for a sermon. First is the incubation phase. 2, the recognition phase. 3, the infiltration phase. Now, if you think back what I just read you just a few moments ago, it says that they're now in the infiltration phase. So what did that mean? Well, what it means is there's phases that they go through to take control over a nation, and it's telling you where they're at. Then the infiltration, as Birmingham's estimated 235,000 Muslims, over 200 city mosques prepare for 30 days of religious observance. They have literally infiltrated that city and have 235 Muslims. And in one city, 200 mosques? That's one city. 200 mosques. So they're taking all the old buildings, they're taking all the old churches as they become vacant, and they're buying up everything and making mosques. That's just one city. Then you get into confrontation. Now, I'm going to just stop here. Take a look at this picture. There is no Lord but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Look at that. All right, so that's on the outside billboard of this church. And supposedly this is a Christian nation. Then the last is the imposition, which I'll cover in another part. So I'm going to be delivering a sermon tomorrow. And I'm going to be delivering a sermon that's going to be called The Sojourner. But I'm going to include the spiritual sojourner. So I'm going to talk about the deadly infiltration of the spiritual sojourner that's overtaken this world and this nation. So be sure to watch tomorrow as we tape. This is the first time I'm ever doing this one. It's called The Spiritual Sojourner. So tell your friends. And if you don't have services, tune in. But if you have services, by all means, go to it. And you can always catch this later. And you can write in for it. God willing, we'll have it on tape and you can get it. But The Spiritual Sojourner. All right, now let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Battle of Lepenta. The Battle of Lepenta, all right? So in the meantime, take a look at this little movie here, this little video. God loves the worst version of you, and we'll be right back.
The better that we appear to be, the easier it is for us to imagine that we deserve the love of God. But there is not a day in our lives when you or I have deserved for God to love us. He loves us because He chose to love us, not out of obligation, not out of need. He loves us because it's who He is. God is love. And we cannot fully understand that because we're so used to human love. And human love will always fall short. But God's love did not fall short. It went all the way. His Son, Jesus, went all the way, even to death for us, because He was full of the Father's love, the love that the Father has for you and me. It's easy to think that Jesus died for the best version of us. God knows all things, so He knew what we would look like on our very best day. And it's tempting to think that Jesus looked at that day and found encouragement in making the ultimate sacrifice. But it's just not true. Jesus died for the worst version of you. Jesus died loving the worst version of you. It wasn't our charity or our acts of kindness that He felt. Instead, it was our sin that was heaped on His shoulders. And yet, His love was greater than all of our sin and all of our mistakes. Did you know that love covers over a multitude of sins? What a love He must have that He is able to cover our sins when we repent. So what do you do with the love like this? It's easy. If you've been running, come back. Come back to the one who loves you. Jesus speaks these words in Revelation 2:4. But I have this against you, that you have left your first love. Jesus has promised never to leave us or forsake us. So it's not Him that does the leaving, it's us. In the next verse in Revelation, Jesus says, therefore, remember from where you have fallen, and repent, and do the deeds you did at first. His love has not changed. God's love will never change. Whatever it is that may be separating you from Him, lay it down. Lay it down at His feet and watch His love cover it.
Well, welcome back. All right, now let's get into the spiritual side of this and talk about the nuggets of what we just talked about in the news portion of the program. We're going to talk about now the Battle of Lepenta. The Battle of Lepenta, all right? Here's our biblical nuggets from here. All right, this is what we brought up earlier in the program. We were talking about the public controversy in the prayer. So why the controversy? What's really going on? This October 7th event in 2017 versus an October event in 1571. So I went back and looked and said, it's 447 years ago. So are we looking at things that took place through spiritual eyes here? Is God showing us events that if says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. So are we looking at in Europe and with the Muslims, events that are so similar in pattern to the past so that God can show us what's coming in the future? Let's begin to take a look at that. We're going to talk about the underlying spiritual connections now. All right, so now let's talk with the actual event of what that event actually is. It was called the Rosary at the Borders. All right, this was a quote. It took place in 320 churches near Poland's borders and 4,000 so-called prayer zones, including the biggest international airport in Poland. All right, this Rosary event now. Let's talk about the Rosary event on October 7, 2017, and the prayers that surround border. Now, this is primarily, as it says right here, the Polish Catholics gather at the border for the vast Rosary prayer event. This is primarily a Catholic event that's going on here. The event from 447 years ago was primarily Catholic. And who were they going against? It was going against the Ottoman Turks, who were Muslims. So what are they praying against? They're praying against protecting their country from what? The Muslim infiltration, which absolutely is I thought was beautiful as far as their concept. I don't agree with the Catholic Church. But we're looking at something here that's so reminiscent of what took place in the past and very reminiscent of what's coming. So he goes on to say this. This was in Warsaw, Poland. It says, Polish Catholics clutching rosary beads gathered at the location along the country's 2,000-mile border on Saturday for a mass demonstration during which they prayed for salvation for Poland and for the world. Some participants said that they were demonstrating against the spread of Islam's influence. Going on. All right, this says this. It's a real serious thing for us, Basnia Sabinska told the AP. We want to pray for peace. We want to pray for our safety. Of course, everyone comes here with a different motivation. But the most important thing is to create something like a circle of prayer alongside the entire border, intense and passionate. So now, when I read that, I said, wow, that's pretty serious as to what their intent was. You know, when we pray, we ask putting God's protection around us, right? So, you know, and circling like they're doing, like circling their country. So when I read this, I said, you know, there's a spiritual battle that's going on here because God says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we're wrestling against the principalities of the air. So I honestly believe what we're looking at now is the spiritual alignment beginning to set up for the end-time prophetic events that's going to come place. So when you look at what takes place now, when I bring out the rest of the story, you're going to be absolutely amazed when you see it all begin to come together. And it's like the people there are saying, listen, we need protection. It's like they're terrified because there's something greater that's taking place, and it brings them back to the day they're protesting 447 years ago. All right, here's the controversial day of prayer, going on to say this. The church leaders say the event is purely religious, but there are concerns that it could be seen as endorsing the state's refusal to let Muslim migrants. It is the feast day that marks the anniversary of the Christian victory over the Ottoman Turks at the Sea Battle of Lepanto on October 7th, 1571. What in the world is that battle? On that day, this is what came out of the victory, and then we'll talk about the battle in just a moment. It says, during the battle, this is recorded in history. I don't believe it happened this way, but it's recorded this way. And let me say this. Demons can do things. They can manifest themselves to make themselves look like anything. They can make themselves look like angels of light if they want to. All right? But this Pope says that he believed that Mary came to him and told him that gave him a glorious victory before the word actually came from the battle. So what he's saying, if you go look at the history, and I just shortened it here, the battle's going on, and the Pope's in prayer with a whole bunch of other people. In the middle of the prayer, he gets up, opens the window, and said, Mary just spoke to me, and we got a victory. Hours later, the word comes to him that they had a victory. So that's what's recorded in the annals of the Catholic Encyclopedia. They believe it, and you're not going to talk to anybody anything against it. So now, from that time, that's where they came out with the rosary, the prayer, and the special day that the Catholics use today. And that's why they're all with the rosaries that are over there. God says the dead know nothing, so there's no way that Mary could have came to him. But it could have been a demon that actually manifested himself in such a way. So I just wanted to make that clear. So now, the Catholic battle, the battle that saved the West. This is from an article that came out in 2007. So as a result, in 1571, the year of the Battle of Lepanto, the most important naval contest in history, is not well known to Americans. October 7th, the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, which is what the Pope instituted because of that victory. That's when this day was instituted, the Lady of the Rosary, which celebrates the victory of Lepanto. The battle saved the Christian West from the defeat at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. Going on. If not for the victory at Lepanto, this is a quote, the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 by Francis Drake and Queen Elizabeth Pirates would not have happened. So what this book and this quote was saying, because of this victory in 1571, it stopped the Turks from coming in. At that time, Spain was the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Had Spain been defeated, there's a real probability that England would not have been able to overcome the obstacles against the Turks. History would be different, and that's what's being told in this story. They said this, that it was a tragedy for the Catholic Kingdom of Spain and a triumph for the Protestant protest in the British Empire, and the defeat determined the kind of history that would one day be taught in American schools, which is Protestant British history. So what they're saying, if it wasn't for this battle, everything around the world would be absolutely different. And chances are it would be. And so what we're looking at now, at the end time, if the Muslims are allowed to continue, the remainder of history would be totally different. But just like in this battle, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, what's going on now is going to happen the exact same way, and the Muslim nations will be defeated through prophecy. We know that that's taking place. So another name for the Battle of Lepanto is the Crescent and the Cross. And I found this book about the Crescent and the Cross. It simply talked about the battle and how important it was. And then there was another book, which is called Victory of the West, which talks about the great Christian-Muslim clash at the Battle of Lepanto. Now, isn't it amazing that we know nothing about these stories? And when I went into this, I said, this is absolutely phenomenal what's been laying out there for us that we haven't put together yet. But I believe we're putting it together now because we're getting closer in history to the return of Jesus Christ. So now let's look at these insights as world events from the end time. So I've got here, now what I've done is I've taken a 1-hour special by the History Channel, and I'm breaking it down into 3 approximately 4-minute segments. And with each segment, I'm going to stop. We're going to bring out events that took place and show you how they tie into history. At the end of each one, we'll take and we'll align it to the biblical events and show you how absolutely ironic all this is, pointing forward that's actually taking place today for an event that took place 447 years ago. So now, let's look at in video 1. This is what's going to come up in video 1. So I'm going to tell you what's in it first, and then we'll come back and I'll bring in the biblical point. I'm going to tell you what's in it so you can think spiritual about this. First, the fear of the spread of Islam. The world looks to the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope to give them security, and they talk about a military alliance with the Pope. Sound like end time? That's what's going on. All right, let's play part 1 now, and I'll be right back.
The blue waters of the Mediterranean hold a tragic secret. Here, over 400 years ago, 2 great navies, one Muslim, the other Christian, fought a ferocious battle for control of this sea. Hundreds of ships and thousands of men perished. The seas around Lepanto have long since hidden the relics of this famous battle. Many explorers, including Jacques Cousteau, have searched for the wrecks, yet failed. But now a new team of underwater archaeologists have found sensational evidence of the battle. In the 16th century, Spain was Europe's leading power. In Madrid, King Philip II ruled his empire with a heavy hand. He was a devout Catholic. In Italy, the Papal States were the religious center of power, led by Pope Pius V in Rome. The other power was Venice, Europe's commercial capital. The fleets of Venice's leader, Doge Loredano, had a monopoly over Mediterranean trade. During their investigation, Professors Marco Morin, and Paolo Zelmi have discovered eyewitness records. They confirm the Venetians were long preparing for the all-decisive battle with their Turkish rivals. The documents mention nighttime meetings, new secret weapons, and calls for war. One particular name is referred to frequently, obviously a key figure: Francesco Duodo, a clever Venetian arms designer and shipbuilder. His military inventions would have a decisive influence on the coming war. The clandestine meetings were desperately needed. The powerful Ottoman Empire was expanding into Europe. The rulers of Venice worried over their trade monopoly. Rome worried about the spread of Islam. And Madrid felt threatened by the military might of the Turks. The Ottoman Empire's capital was Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. As the empire grew, the thriving metropolis became an important naval port. From here, the Turks set off to conquer the West. The Sultan Selim worked hand in hand with pirates and renegade Christians. Their advance by water and by land seemed unstoppable. In Eastern Europe, they left behind a trail of destruction. By 1570, the Sultan ruled the territories around the Black Sea, as well as Greece, the Balkans, and northern Africa. Another momentous discovery was made recently by Turkish historian Idris Bostan. He found original documents once presumed lost about the Turkish fleet. They date back to the Battle of Lepanto.
No fleet could have survived a sea battle against the powerful Ottoman Turks. No country had a fleet to match that of the Turks. Neither Venice nor Spain possessed the means to fight the Ottoman fleet at sea. The only way to face them was to form an alliance.
The Vatican was alarmed. More than the ransacking of southern Europe, the Papal State dreaded the expansion of Islam towards the West. The Pope worked desperately to contain the advancing Turks. Vatican envoys paid numerous visits to Madrid and Venice. The Pope believed that only a powerful military alliance would stop the Eastern aggressor. His decree, "I will raise arms against the Turks," was more than just an idle threat.
All right, so now you see the beginning of the setup. So what are we looking at? It says the known world was moving into a time that was unlike any other time in history. That's what went on just back then. So as the Ottoman Empire expanded into Europe, during that same period is that when the Ottoman Turks captured Jerusalem and surrounded its armies around Jerusalem. Europe was abound but could not buy or sell without paying the tribute to the Turks. So what I'm doing here today, I'm giving you the foundation of what actually took place, and I'm aligning the scriptures that show you what happened there were identical to what's going to happen in the future, Revelation 13:11. At that time, the Roman Empire rises up again and forms an alliance with the military leader. So we're beginning to see that was taking place as that segment came to a close. So now, as we begin video 2, you'll see that there will be a United Nations of Europe. You'll see that they begin to develop a military might that's unstoppable and works with the military leader to bring all of this about. So now, let's go ahead and play now the second part of our video, part 2.
In 1570, the decision was made to build, together with a large number of small galleys, 11 large galleasses, and to arm them for war.
It was the birth of a new type of ship, the formidable galleass.
Questo venne fatto in gran segreto
Everything was done in absolute secrecy. The ships were armed with immense artillery, in total with 30 to 40 guns each. These were positioned both in the bow and the stern as well as in broadside, so the ships could fire in all directions.
This new design had a decisive advantage over the ordinary galley warships. The old-style galley had just 6 light guns and 1 heavy gun at the bow, and only 2 small guns in the stern, and it could only fire forward or backwards. When attacked from the side, these guns were useless. With the horrific events in Cyprus ringing in their ears, the alliance which the Pope so desperately needed finally came together.
Raggiunsero questo accordo.
Eventually, all sides reached an agreement. The treaty was signed on May the 24th, 1571, in Rome. So, 400 years ago, an alliance was formed that was actually comparable with today's NATO.
The European alliance was named the Holy League. Its members were Spain, Venice, Savoy, Genoa, Sicily, and Malta, and of course, the Vatican. The Pope also contributed armed forces, led by an exceptional strategist with a brilliant career, Admiral Marcantonio Colonna, who had already fought against the Turks in Cyprus. In May 1571 in St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope presented Colonna with his mission. In the name of the Holy League, he was to set up a European armada to confront the Ottoman fleet under the banner of the Cross. This was to be a holy war. Two months before the Great Battle, the Holy League assembled its best ships and its most capable captains. The war galleys from Barcelona, Rome and Venice gathered in the Strait of Messina. For a time, Messina became a gigantic naval base. The Real, the flagship of this impressive Christian armada, arrived there on August the 24th, 1571. The splendid galley was under the command of Don Juan of Austria, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He had supreme command over the entire fleet. At the age of 26, Don Juan was already at the height of his career. His successful campaign against the Moors already earned him great fame. Now he was to lead 280 ships into a battle that would decide Europe's future. 1571, the Holy League's fleet left the Strait of Messina and set course for the east. Their destination, the island of Oxia. They too had spies who reported on the movements of the Turkish fleet. On board the Real, the supreme commander, Don Juan of Austria, worked out his plan of attack. The Venetian commander would bring the 6 new miracle weapons, the galleasses, into position at the front of the fleet. The other Venetian leaders had the task of protecting the flagship Real. The Christians would go into battle with the galleys deployed on one line and the galleasses in front to lead the attack. This would be the definitive showdown between the Cross and the Crescent.
I said some encouraging words to the crew before the battle, and then I knelt down and prayed to God. I asked him to grant me victory, and all the others on the galley and in the entire fleet did the same.
Okay, now we set the tone on the first video of what we were looking for, showing you the comparisons. It should have been unmistakable, the parallels of what we've seen in this video. So the Pope forms a holy alliance league. And we talk about Daniel, the Daniel with the 10 toes. And this gentleman said that you have these are United Nations that are over there. You have the 10 nations that we're talking about at the end time, all coming together. And we talk about the beast rising up in the power and forming with a second beast, bringing in the military might of all these things that are taking place. a time unprecedented in the history of mankind for that time. Never before has that ever happened, that they were being brought to the ephesus of an end-time scenario during their day. The alliance was signed on May 24th and began on May 25th. The alliance that they signed was May 25th. Interesting day. And look what it says here, that no flesh would be saved, Matthew 24. And Rome was beginning to use revolutionary weapons to bring about an end type of scenario to destroy the enemy. It was at that time that the Roman Empire rises up again, back then, which points again to the future, that Rome's going to rise again one more time, going to form an alliance with a military leader, and we see that in Revelation 13 talking about the second beast. So the parallels are absolutely unmistakable. So what are we looking at with this alliance? Believe it or not, that alliance was signed on Pentecost. Went into place on Pentecost. It was signed the day before and actually took place on Pentecost. Amazing. When do you think the battle takes place? We'll talk about that in just a second. So now let's look at video number 3. So what's coming? We're going to see a king of the south, which is the Muslim people coming up against who? The king of the north. And the alliance, just like the 10 toes coming forward, you'll see them rise up against the king of the north, and you'll see them push back and take over the king of the south. All right, so now let me back up a second here. Now let's play video 3, which is going to be absolutely obvious by this time of the scenario that we're looking at. Let's play video 3.
October 1571, the Sultan's armada was ready for battle. 250 galleys and 60 small, extremely maneuverable warships, and 100,000 soldiers. When the Turks discussed their battle formation, a serious argument erupted between the two fleet commanders, Ali Pasha and Uluj Ali Pasha.
Uluj Ali Pasha, müttefik donanmasının
Uluj Ali Pasha advised Ali Pasha to stay close to the coast of Lepanto and wait, rather than go out into the open sea, away from the protection offered by their fortresses and guns on land. He believed that the enemy fleet wouldn't dare to venture far into the well-protected bay. But Ali Pasha, inexperienced as he was in naval warfare, was far too proud to accept this advice. He didn't want the enemy to think that the Turks were cowards.
Büyük Osmanlı donanmasının kaçtığını söyletmek istememiş.
So the Ottoman fleet left the safety of Lepanto and put to sea. Their aim, to annihilate the Christians in open combat. When the two fleets met, they formed a battle line in the Gulf of Patras that extended over 5 kilometers. The two fleets numbered 600 ships and carried over 200,000 soldiers. There were so many vessels it took the sailors 2 hours to maneuver them into position, closely packed, oar to oar. Each side was divided into 3 main squadrons. The greatest naval conflict in European history was about to begin. The battle began amidst a blaze of cannon fire. The commanders relied on their oarsmen to propel their boats into action. For the Christian Don Juan and the Muslim Ali Pasha, this was the day of reckoning between two civilizations, between two religions. On board the Real, the Christian Supreme Commander gave the order to ram the enemy ships.
As one could recognize the Turkish flagship by the pennants it carried, I ordered the helmsman to steer the galley directly up to it. So he did, and the two ships attacked one another with great force.
The Muslims outnumbered the Christians, but the Christians had more sophisticated weaponry. Their guns were far superior to the Turkish crossbows. This was hand-to-hand combat, using hooks, swords and picks. A fierce fight raged for hours. It ended in an inferno of blood, severed limbs and bodies. The Battle of Lepanto was at its fiercest around the center of the formations, especially around the ships of Don Juan and his rival Ali Pasha. The two navies showered each other in cannonballs and gunfire, and then fell on each other in a torrent of hand-to-hand combat. The galleasses that were constructed just for this battle played a crucial role. Their high-built decks made boarding and capture impossible. Moreover, they could fire from all sides. Venice's brilliant invention quickly obliterated a third of the entire Ottoman fleet. Just 4 of these extraordinary warships destroyed 108 Turkish galleys. The Ottoman formation was crippled, the proud supremacy of the Sultan's fleet broken. The bulk of the Turkish armada sank to its doom in the Gulf of Patras. Ali Pasha, the Sultan's commander-in-chief, died under the axe. In a gruesome twist, Juan of Austria ordered the severed head of his arch-enemy to be carried through the triumphant crowd of soldiers. When the sun set on that day, the sea was dyed blood red. Hundreds of ships were left behind in the Gulf of Patras, floating tombs that sank to a watery grave. There is still much more to find. Perhaps the local fishermen will once again provide the next crucial clues. The battle that inspired a poet will continue to lure explorers and scientists who seek to know the full story of the time when the Cross and the Crescent fought for the future of Europe.
That cross and that crescent, they're going to fight one more time. Daniel 11 talks about that as the king of the south will push against the king of the north, and the king of the north will push back. And during that time, it will be unprecedented, which is talking about the time just before the return of Jesus Christ. So it's an interesting parallel. But that battle took place during the Feast of Tabernacles of that same year. Amazing story, the parallels in the time and the events that these things fell and what they look like as you point forward into prophetic history. So what we're looking at today is the spiritual realm bringing up its ugly head, pointing to what's coming by looking at the history of the past. Now, during that time, we got one more little nugget I want to bring to you. During that time, all right, Revelation 13:7 says this, "It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them." 1571, during this time, the Venetian government was at war with Turkey, which we just showed. It says, resolved to expel all the Jews from Venice. This is out of the book of the Silk Industry, Renaissance in Venice. And this is out of one of the pages that comes up, and I'm going to bring that up just a little bit bigger to show you. It says, a growing enmity towards the Levantine Jews in Venice in the late 1560s exploded during the War of Cyprus, for which they were held responsible, with their arrest and the confiscation of their merchandise in 1570, with a decree for their expulsion in 1571. So when you're seeing all this going on, just like at the end time, when all these battles are taking place in the same chapter, the very same chapter, when the Holy Roman is revived, when you begin to see the alliance with that second beast, when you begin to see the push against the south, against the north, and the nations, these 10 toes coming together, there's going to be a persecution of the saints. And you're looking at that same event actually took place at that time. Well, fortunately, things settled down and they never put it into place and they didn't have to move them out. But later, they were moved to a ghetto. And the ghetto was a place of the house of prostitutes for the city. So you see the persecution of God's people even at that time. Well, anyway, that's what we have for our program today. So let's begin to wrap it up. We're a little bit over time here for August 17th from the home office. So this year's giveaway, we've been talking about this. We're going to continue till the feast. The music by Mark Rosinko, On the Road to Tomorrow. We got that CD together now. We're going to be giving it out. And we're going to be giving out the 3 DVDs, Satan's Plan of Deception. So it's a counterfeit plan of God. We're going to be giving that away at the feast. So be sure to come to the feast and get your copies of all of this great stuff. In the mail last week, Promises of the Father, a sermon I did earlier in the year, and Faith in the Church by Clayton Evans. So now, we're on the countdown to the fall holy days. Just under a month now. We're just under a month to the Feast of Trumpets. So we're going to be talking about that as we go forward into the fall holy days. So get ready. We'll be talking about trumpets and atonement and tabernacles as we go. So there's our friends as they're getting ready to bring their summer to an end. So before we can go any further, we got to get our shark. There goes our shark. All right, now let's begin to bring our program to a close with a little video. It's called The Power of Words, and I'll be right back to say goodbye.
What did you do to my sign?
I wrote the same, but in different words.
Thanks, love.
Well, there you have it. That's our program. By the way, that little video has been seen 27 million times around the world. So I thought we would share that with you today to bring our program to a close. Well, there you have it for news, nuggets, and insights for this week. We appreciate you watching. Be sure to share this with all your friends. Let everybody know. And we hope you enjoyed our program today with a little bit of history that brings us to the future. From all of us here at God's Unchanging Word, thanks again for watching, supporting, and by all means, you be careful till next week, and God be with you.